Umatalang ba? Niliyan pahan matsikyang napiukasyang enang tunita. Nipot lang naksino. Nitawag ang manikyang piu is kamayamangan. Napumaytian. Good morning, it's a beautiful day. My name is Liga Shilma. I'm a member of the Hopi tribe from the village of Hootvilla in Third Mesa. My maternal clan is the Sun Clan, and my paternal clan is the Water Coyote. At this time, I'd like to provide a short prayer in my Hopi language. Papa ovetawa itanas umse alitamumi nama atakna ba itahala itoti obium tuna yaw kan ang tuwa naksani by song kasinang tuwa yojik yaka pilhala itoti obium kahaki ayon na ikyang sinway yutumaltane. Obi itaya biyasa naksawaltis itanami tuna yaw kyakyang nakyatsi kyakyang itaya itatumalay aw alang tutak. Yang sinom itamum itatumalay tinglay pumuputak mong basto tini makowi umaansa himuyang kam umabina nami anang tatwe umahalay kaya kiyang biyo akakamtak kini wisni pa ubiyanta ni papa. Next slide, please. So I will serve as the facilitator for today's webinar. I am the traditional cultural liaison for AIVRTTAC. In October of 2015, NAU, Institute for Human Development, received a cooperative agreement from RSA, Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, to provide education, training, and technical assistance to the 93 tribes who are managing their own vocational rehabilitation programs. However, here at AIVRTTAC, we recognize that close to 150 tribes are benefiting from the RSA VR services, as some tribes serve as a consortium, meaning that one tribe serves as a grantee to serve more than just their tribe. Currently, there are 93 tribally operated VR projects located in 26 states. Today's webinar is akin to the talking circles that we have been doing for the past couple of years. So I would like to invite all of you to be engaged in today's webinar. I welcome your questions, your comments, your shared lived experiences, observations being made in serving as a VR tribal professional. So feel free to chime in during the webinar, and I also extend that invitation to the AIVRTTAC team. As many of you know, the Northwest Indian College is also part of the AIVRTTAC for this new 5-year grant period, and they are responsible for providing the personnel training as part of their Tribal Vocational Rehabilitation Institute. And we do know that many of you have attended their courses, completed, and have been awarded their certificate of completion. And we strongly encourage that you consider participating in their services. And we thank the TVR Institute staff for all their efforts. Next slide, please. The overarching goal of AIVRTTAC is to serve all the 93 AIVRS projects in providing education, training, and technical assistance, with the anticipated outcome that AIVRS project improvement in their VR knowledge, their skills, and their abilities as VR projects to provide high quality VR services to tribal consumers or participants residing on or near their designated service area. In addition, our efforts will also improve the AIVRS project operations, services, and employment outcomes in serving tribal members with disabilities. Next slide, please. So today's key learning outcomes, and this is by no means set in stone. I would like to think that the end of this webinar and during the talking circle discussion that we will add to the anticipated outcome of this new activity for the AIVRTTAC, meaning developing the AIVR's Elder Circle of Wisdom Keepers. So today's learning outcome, we anticipate that participant will learn about the AIVRTTAC definition of culturally appropriate and responsive services and its guiding principles. Participants will identify the purpose of the AIVR Circle of Elders and its relation to the project purpose, goals, and objectives. And lastly, participants will describe the AIVRTTAC Circle of Elders in guidance in identifying culturally appropriate and responsive practices to improve tribal VR services. Next slide, please.
Lee, did you want to do the poll question?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay, at this time, Ava will post the poll questions, and we will allow you some time to provide your responses, and we will review the responses once we allow you enough time. So read both question 1 and 2. We're very interested in your responses.
Thank you all for answering these questions. It really helps us to learn more about what you all need from us.
So what we have on the screen right now is 13 out of the 16 respondents indicate that they have been participating in the AIVRTTAC events. And 3 of the 16 indicate that they are not currently participating. Maybe you could also provide us an explanation as to lack of full engagement. That would also help us. It could be a matter of the time in scheduling the webinars, the talking circles, or you may not be fully aware of the extent of the AIVRTTAC services right now.
Lee, there were a few responses.
Okay.
This is all anonymous, by the way, everyone. So
Okay.
no worries there. Of reasons for if someone was not participating in the AIVRTTAC webinars, talking circles, and AIVR's Academy, and then the TVR Institute classes. Some of the responses were, "This is my first talking circle. I just started. Welcome." I have not had the time to take any classes. And then someone said that they were participating in the webinars and talking circles. But the other options they were not participating in.
Okay.
And for the question if AIVRTTAC education, training, and technical assistance was culturally appropriate and responsive to your needs to improve or expand tribal VR services, if someone answered no, there were a few responses that we do not have an AIVRTTAC project team. Another answer was, it's difficult for AIVRTTAC to be responsive to all tribes' cultures, but the learning helps us as staff to explore within our tribes on how to make the services relevant to the local culture. Thank you for the training today from a respected cultural leader in the AIVRTTAC community, or in the AIVR's community, Lee.
Yes, I believe it's also of interest that 16 of the 16 respondents, which is 100%, indicate that the AIVRTTAC services is responsive to their needs to improve or expand their tribal VR services. All right, thank you for participating in the poll questions. Ava, we can move on to the next slide. Are there any comments from any of the attendees, we can certainly also listen to what you would like to share with everyone regarding what AIVRTTAC is doing right now. Don't be shy. Okay, looks like there's no comments that will be shared at this time. What you see on the screen right now is part of the AIVRTTAC definition that I developed, and with the approval of the AIVRTTAC team and input from the RSA project team, the project director, Wayne Daigle, made a decision that from this point on, we will implement the AIVRTTAC definition and its guiding principle. And at this time, we're giving you the opportunity to review what we have developed. And certainly, we welcome your input. It is wordy, so bear with me while I read through this. I believe it's important that we capture what you may be thinking of in terms of how you define culturally appropriate and responsive services. In the provision of education, guidance, technical assistance, and capacity building to address the essential needs of the AIVRS project, the AIVRTTAC will recognize and respect each tribe's unique history, sovereignty, oral traditional knowledge, spirituality, languages, beliefs, values, livelihood, ceremonies, and perspectives about tribal members with disabilities. Next slide, Ava. The AIVRTTAC's culturally appropriate and responsive services will ensure its relevance to the cultural background, needs, priorities, experiences, interests, and capabilities of AIVRS participants to make informed decisions to become gainfully employed, achieve improved quality of life, become financially self-sufficient, and live independently. So following this are the guiding principles. AIVRTTAC guiding principles. We will acknowledge the unique social and historical context of tribal VR settings. Our activities will be conducted in culturally respectful, relevant, and meaningful ways. We will conduct talking circles in safe and trusting learning environments. We will have respect for participants' lived experiences, belief, values, and traditional indigenous knowledge. The capacity building will bridge the federal VR practices and tribal VR holistic practices. Culturally responsive teachings to strengthen participants' identity, beliefs, and traditions. Reciprocity with participants to achieve shared common goals, feel valued and empowered. Knowledge translation that will complement tribal VR emerging and promising practices. The anticipated outcome of academic courses and coaching is to build capacity of tribal VR personnel, knowledge, and skills. We will provide accessible and user-friendly project website with relevant cultural information and resources. Our activities, materials, products, and practices will be culturally responsive to participants. Next slide, please. AIVRTTAC will integrate cultural knowledge and practices within its project activities. We will incorporate Native adult learning principles essential to self-directed learning, relevance, and experiences. We will honor and celebrate tribal VR participants' achievements. We will focus our efforts on tribal goals to benefit program consumers and sustain VR services. I believe we have some comments in the chat box. Jamie, is there anything that needs to be shared at this time?
Yeah, I think they were in relation to some of the questions that were in the poll.
Okay.
In regards to participation in the webinars and some of our other training opportunities. Rachel, for example, said that, depending on the time of the year, if it's daylight savings time or not, her tribe has a requirement that they don't take their lunch break during the normal lunch hour. I'm sure that's to be able to accommodate individuals that come to the office during their lunch break. But usually if the time changes in the spring, some of our webinars fall during that lunch hour. So I'm not sure if it was Wayne or Rebecca that responded and said, we realize that sometimes it's hard for folks to attend the webinars due to the time of day. But, we always try to look at the time zones because we provide, the webinars to the entire country. So sometimes, we're trying to accommodate the West Coast more so because, their days are starting a little bit later than, say, for example, on the East Coast. So we don't want to have a webinar at 9 in the morning East Coast time and it's 6 in the morning Pacific time. But anyway, we try our darndest, Rachel, to accommodate everyone. And then Amanda also said that she tries to participate, but right now her office is down 2 staff and she's by herself. And so she's trying to cover several different positions herself, do most of the work herself, and but she does like to get those CRC credits. So, and I sent her a direct message and said if she could email us any of the webinars she attended this year and felt like that she needed CRC credits for, if they are indeed a CRC credit webinar, we'll make sure she gets the certificate. And same for anyone else. That's basically what was in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Jamie.
Yes, sir.
The AIVRTTAC purpose that is on the screen right now, most, if not all of you, are familiar with the AIVRTTAC purpose statement as developed by the RSA. So you're aware that the purpose of the AIVRTTAC program is to provide VR services that include culturally appropriate service for American Indians with disability who reside on or near federal and state reservation consistent with the individual strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and informed choice, so that such individual may prepare for and engage in high quality that will increase opportunities for economic self-sufficiency. In my review of tribal grant proposals over the past couple of years, I've noted that some programs have also developed their own mission and vision statement to complement the federal AIVRTTAC purpose statement, which I believe is really great because it brings in the cultural relevancy for each individual sovereign nation. And in my review of grant proposals, I usually, well, almost always find information on the description of how a tribe defines cultural relevancy. And this is in the design section where information is provided as to how culturally relevant services will be provided by that particular tribe. Furthermore, they will provide information as to how these services will be assessed and evaluated to determine how cultural relevancy has assisted the tribal consumers in achieving successful employment outcome. We have several directors who are participating in today's webinar, as well as seasoned directors like Wayne, Jamie, Rebecca. If there's anything that you'd like to comment on right now, please feel free to do so in reference to the AIVRTTAC purpose statement.
I'll just add one thing that I think has been very helpful for me as well as other people, and that is to really look at the comprehensive assessment, which is in the middle of this purpose, and to call it the Great 8. So when we look at strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interest, and informed choice, those are 8 specific areas. And calling them the Great 8 and how they apply to every individual, how they look very different for every individual, that's that comprehensive assessment that really is very powerful in being able to work in an AIVRTTAC project in a way that really meets the tribal member with a disability's needs, as well as where they're headed in the future. So I call them the Great 8 because I think they're wonderful in being able to explore these different areas with consumers.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any other comments? Anyone else want to share how their particular program BR is designed, the model of your tribal vocab program? Jamie?
Yeah, I'm just curious. We're kind of getting into the section now where we really need input from you all as directors of your programs on what this looks like, you know, the cultural appropriateness and inclusion in your tribal VR services. It's going to look different, I know, for every project because every project is different. A different tribe with different values and norms. And, you know, this is really where I'm so interested in hearing what you have to say about providing culturally appropriate services and what your opinions are and what your ideas are in this area.
I want to add on to Jamie's comment. I believe each program and their staff in their outreach and dissemination efforts and in their 30-second elevator speech provide a good summary of what their program means. And that's really important. I believe as part of your outreach and dissemination efforts, it's always important to make sure that you highlight the purpose of your program. And also in developing partnership with tribal programs, state programs, your local employers, educational institution, and the buy-in to participate in your service efforts. Ava, we can move on to the next slide. So here you see a visual of the 93 programs located in 26 states across the country. We recognize that each of the 93 programs are unique, and we respect that. So how you provide services is clearly an indication of how your tribe has in the past and currently serve tribal members with disabilities. In my conversation with several of the programs that I worked with, they have informed me then rather than using tribal VR program, they have developed their own tribal VR program name using their tribal language, which I believe is also really great. We also have learned that some of the program have incorporated certain elements of their culture to develop their program design. I know the Navajo VR program used the Navajo basket as an analogy for their VR process. I'm also aware that the Hopi tribe also used traditional farming as an analogy to indicate the VR process, which we understand is a very useful tool that the potential consumers and current participants can easily relate to. I believe Paula and Elise are out there in the audience. Do you care to share some time with us and talk about your traditional VR model?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Lee, for calling us out. Just kidding.
I'm always one for promoting the VR programs.
I like the way you covered all the definitions that AIVRTTAC is following. I believe that, we're all able to establish our programs, develop our programs around our community cultures, beliefs, and wellness models that to work directly with people with disabilities. I believe it's a lot about identity, self-identity, and belonging within our communities with regards to citizenship within our communities. And based on identity and belonging, we have a whole lot of reverence for the land and connection to the land. And that's another part of our view on we're here in this sacred area. For us is within our 6 sacred mountains, one of them being there in Flagstaff. So it's about that being and belonging and our identity. And based on that, and working with our program participants or consumers, it's very interrelational. It's that relationship based. And I like the grade 8 that was pointed out because it starts off with strengths of our community, strengths of our applicants that apply for services. So we approach services as a very strength-based model of approaching services. And again, it's about self-identity, self-respect, and self-care of each individual. Of course, there's concepts within Navajo teachings about Hojon and striving towards that positivity, that beautiful, that harmonious, basically being happy within our environment, and that we are given that gift of life. And so as people with disabilities, it doesn't matter if they have disabilities, they are still people that are striving towards wellness and that positive aspect of life. Again, I believe that we really work towards each individual's unique beliefs, values, and practices, because Navajo has adopted some of the Native American church teachings and some of the, Christian teachings, as well as, the Navajo traditional teachings. So we approach every applicant from that standpoint, from a culturally responsive standpoint, allowing language access, incorporating their cultural strengths, their perspectives, and as Lee mentioned, their lived experiences. We do use the basket as our, example of what that represents, the 4 directions, and that whole thought process of the Navajo basket. Navajo baskets start with the east, goes in the clockwise direction of south, and then west, and then the north. And again, the east part is really representing the new dawn, and infancy. And then as we move towards the southerly direction, youth, and then western towards the middle age, and then of course north is representing the elder wisdom and sihasin, which we refer to as self-resilience. And within our VR model, again, it's the outcome of employment. And we try to recognize, not just an employment outcome, but what are the contributions to community. When a consumer has a positive employment outcome, what are those contributions to the community? And so we try to celebrate those areas of outcomes as well. So that's just a little bit about where our Navajo model or approaches to the VR process looks like. And we try to refine it each time we write our grant and we look at it. In Navajo culture, it doesn't necessarily change, so we still use the same model, but staff that are participating in the grant application process, we try to look at it, refine it, add their elements to it from their teachings. Sometimes the teachings from the Western Navajo might be a little bit different than what folks were taught in Eastern Navajo. So we just kind of try to combine all that together to build our program. And again, it's about program for services for people with disabilities. So we promote employment and interdependence, not just independence, but interdependence of people with disabilities. So thanks for allowing us a few minutes, Lee, to share that. And I don't know, I emailed Elise, but maybe she can speak on behalf of Hopi.
Thank you, Paula.
Hello, I would be glad to.
Thank you, Elise.
So if nobody's seen ours, I don't know if we can see them. It's not showing. It's being selected here.
Ava, you have it, right?
Yes, it might take me a second to pull it up.
Okay. So ours is, we rely heavily on our corn, to get us through ceremonies, to get us through, we use it in a lot of our traditional foods. So we use it as stages because there's always stages, as in farming. So in our first stages, we tell them, we got to get your field ready, taking a clearing it out. So the first stages are planting stage. You got your corn, you got your planting stick, what we call our soya. And is that right? Lee can help me with the Hopi words. But we explain to them, receiving your referral is pretty much the first stage in your planting. What we say, you're getting yourself ready. And then in that phase, we're doing our intake and our orientation. The second phase is the nurturing. So once we get all of your information and we determine your eligibility, we're starting to nurture you. We, cleaning out, weeding out your field. It would be basically kind of figuring out your barriers, watering, it's just a constant, watching over your field, and what a counselor would do, doing the guidance and the counseling. Then once they get through that phase, it's the growth phase. And in that phase, our outcomes would be whether it's, graduating from a community college or a vocational school, and getting out there to get that employment, or if they choose to go to self-employment, of course, in that phase, that growth phase, you're creating your business plan. So towards the later part of that phase, in our growth phase for our corn, we're starting to see what we look for is the tassels. That's when it's almost like ready. We're checking on our corn, making sure the worms aren't getting into it. And then just, kind of keeping an eye on it, how far it's grown. Then when we get to the harvest phase, then, we're seeing you grow. You're ready to be harvested. You're ready to come off of that stock. We're hoping that you'll have employment. That's what we tell our participants. That's their number one goal, is your employment. And in that harvesting, when we explain to them, we're ready to harvest you now. You've got your job, you're pretty much blossomed in a way, and so in that phase, the counselor will follow them still within that phase, making sure that if they have their employment, they've got their, there's no barriers in the way. And what we're striving for is that successful closure. So that means like you're harvested, you're ready to be put away for the next season to be used again. So in that phase, kind of caught me off guard, kind of rolling through it. But, again, corn is very important to our culture. We use it for everything, to pray, to feed. When we're doing our ceremonies, corn is very important. So we kind of use this in our phase of explaining, our process.
Thank you, Elise. Any comments to the sharing of two tribal VR models?
I just want to thank both Paula and Elise for sharing their models with us. And, this is what we're talking about, how we are incorporating our own cultures into the service provision area. So thank you so much, Paula and Elise, for sharing that with us. I was steady trying to write down notes while you were talking. Also want to say in the chat, there were a couple of comments. First of all, I think Wayne said, come on, he sees people unmuting, but then they start muting back. So don't be afraid to share with us. This is a very safe talking circle here, a sacred circle, and we're all amongst friends here and we support each other. So please join the discussion, comment, or join in the conversation. We'd love to hear from everyone. And then also Amanda added that she would say that 85 to 90% of their IPEs and successes are centered around subsistence activities or outcomes. So for example, fishing, jarring, drying, smoking, hunting, trapping, native crafts, beading, gardening, berry picking, all, for the most part, about 100% of their IPs are culturally driven.
I just asked Ava to share our visual model, and I kind of went through this quickly as well. So you have the relationship-based intake. We share our 4 clans, and we identify with that. As I mentioned before, identity is a big part of that. Identity and belonging. And then the physical part is the IPE and eligibility, eligibility, IPE development. And these are our 4 sacred colors as well. And it's circular by design because, again, applicants can reapply for services. So then providing the program of services is on the west section, and then work and independence or interdependence is on the north side. So again, these are I just wanted to provide you a brief visual. So thank you, Ava, for pulling that up.
Thank you, Paula. Another great example. Ava, I believe we can move to the next slide. So many of you may be wondering, what the purpose of developing a AIVRTTAC circle of elders as wisdom keepers. I thought to bring some clarity to today's discussion, I would share some lived experiences, examples of my lived experiences. But also over the years that I have worked with many of the tribal VR directors, support staff, I too have also learned from them and recognized that there's a lot of similarities as to what I learned growing up as a Hopi individual. But before I read some of the items listed, I want to have you look at the photo that's on the screen. This is a photo of Yugilma. He was one of 19 Hopi men that was imprisoned at the Alcatraz Island in 1895, simply because these men folks did not want our children to be sent off to boarding school. So federal military rounded up my great-grandfather as well as the 18 other men, and they were placed on the Alcatraz Island for approximately a year before they were released. Unfortunately, I did not get to meet my great-grandfather, but part of our current residence is where he lived in Hope Bella. And so, as many of you know, we all have our tribal history, a painful history that we now look at as historical trauma that we're still trying to deal with. And boarding school efforts was one of the ways to strip away our culture, our language, taking over our traditional lands. That being said, I want to share what I grew up with, and some of these lived experiences may resonate with you. And I recognize that traditional teachings vary from tribe to tribe and from one knowledge keeper to the next. Our traditional teachings, as shared by our elders, provides ways of knowing about our tribal livelihood and the importance of our tribal identity. The teaching that I was given has brought clarity to my purpose in life, sense of belonging, responsibility to my family, to my clan, to my community. The importance of holistic wellness practices and human behavior. And our current use of the knowledge and use of native plants as traditional medicine for healing. We must never forget that we don't own the lands that we reside on. As I was taught, we are stewards of our ancestral lands. That we need to maintain a strong spiritual connection with the Creator. As part of my growing up, my initiation into the Katina Society is an example of a rites of passage where I had the opportunity to now become aware of what may be considered esoteric knowledge, privileged knowledge that only the initiates are taught. And I try very hard to fulfill my responsibility as being a member of the Katina Society. Next slide, please. Here is a picture of a Shoshone Bannock elder that I found online. And I would think that this powerful nation also had its way of teaching its tribal membership. We're fully aware that we currently pay respect to the creation, the origin stories in our clan history, that we're taught the proper values, proper ethical behavior. We're fully aware of the need to maintain our languages, for our songs, for our prayers, for our ways of communication, to understand the ceremonial knowledge and proper protocols for participation. As we all know, as sovereign nations, we have a one-to-one relationship with the federal government. But as tribal nations, we too had our own government structure, nation building, and leadership. We look at our elders to provide us with advice and guidance to work with and serve our family, our clan, and our community. In the past, oral storytelling was very important to sustain culture and languages. It was also a system to provide a method for critical thinking, for problem solving and decision making. As different sovereign nations, we have contributed to what is considered scientific knowledge today because we too had our own traditional perspective. For example, the universe, the astrology, the biology, the psychology. So in my opinion, we have a wealth of knowledge that we can tap into and determine whether or not these teachings are relevant in improving our tribal VR practices to better serve our relatives with disabilities. I really would like to hear from the attendees are out there in response to what I shared. Does any of what I shared with you resonate with you?
Hey, Mary here.
Yes. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Well, good afternoon from New York State. I just really appreciate everyone sharing their examples And, it actually makes me wonder what we do here for, Iroquois and Mohawk Nation, because, I know a lot of our stories, a lot of our teachings, but I've never really put them into this perspective of, creating that balance in one's life, and how that whole model can assist our consumers with achieving their employment goals. So I know that there are things that we would offer and incorporate, but I think as a result of, this discussion, I'm going to take this back to our traditional medicines and start asking questions about what are our teachings specifically around, life balance, and what more can we incorporate into our TVR process to help on the traditional values side of working with our consumers. So I just want to say thank you and let you know that that's what this discussion prompted for me, was to have more conversations with our culture and our culture bearers. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I believe Jamie raised her hand.
Yes, thank you so much, Mary, for contributing to the discussion. And Lee, thank you for sharing that information with us on what are Native Indigenous teachings and what does that mean to us as Natives. I want to go back to a comment that Charlene put in the chat. She said we don't necessarily have a model, but we do use our values while working with someone. A majority of their cases have subsistence as the employment goal, similar to what Amanda mentioned earlier, but they are also a consortia of tribes. So they have to take into consideration where the consumer is located and what subsistence activities they actually do. So, I can understand when you're working with a consortia, you're representing a number of cultures. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Charlene. And Mary, thank you for your contribution to the discussion. Yeah, like I was getting a lump in my throat when Lee was talking, was trying to write notes, but it was just, when I heard Lee say, "This is my great grandfather," and just acknowledging what all has transpired since his time to now Lee's time. Thanks, Mary. I see you got to go to another meeting. Thanks for joining us today. Would anyone else like to contribute to the conversation?
Yeah, hi, this is Kim.
Good morning.
Good morning. Actually, good afternoon also. I just wanted to touch on what Charlene also said, is because I was thinking about our program. We work with 11 different tribes. So we don't know a lot of things about a lot of the other tribes, but we're trying to learn. I mean, we have people in all areas of the state, and we encourage them to go to all the local traditional powwows and other events to learn more, and then to share it with the rest of the team. We have team meetings every Tuesday by Zoom. So we're always trying to share so we can all learn about our other neighbors in the area. We might have 6 different Ojibwa tribes in northern Wisconsin, but they still all have different traditions themselves. So sometimes you just have to step back and go, wow, this is so cool, and everybody is so different. So we're always learning, no matter how old we are, we're always learning about other tribes, and it's really cool.
Thank you for sharing that. It gives us a better idea to the makeup of the different VR programs that are operating out there. Next slide, please. So here at AIVRTTAC, with our work with the different tribal work rehab program, and actually the Institute for Human Development here at NAU have worked with the tribal work rehab programs for a very long time. I came into the tribal VR community in 1992 when the American Indian Rehabilitation Training and Research Center was here. And in 1996, we started the capacity building project, and in partnership with several universities like San Diego State University, Southern University, we were providing national grant writing workshops. So that gave me even more opportunity to work more personally with the various tribal work rehab programs. And so this information on the screen right now is but a brief summary of what we have learned. So again, I invite you to share what your individual or tribal perspectives are regarding individuals with disabilities in our tribal communities. We have learned that most of the tribes do not have one word to describe or define disability, nor do they recognize them as individuals with disability within their community. We learned that all the tribes, all the nations make every effort to help these individuals find their place in their tribal communities. Like Hopi, many of the tribes believe that we are made up of divine, body, soul, and spirit. A lot of the tribes also look at disability as being a stage of unwellness or illness that is in disharmony with the four elements of the body, mind, soul, and the spirit. Some tribal communities believe that illness is caused by a violation of a taboo or sacred tribal custom. Many of us also believe that if one of the four is out of harmony, the whole being is out of harmony. Some tribes also believe that each one of us is responsible for our own wellness. Next slide, please. So during the first 6 years of the previous AIVRTTAC, in the beginning, when I served as the project director, early on, we started having weekly meetings, and we would always start our meetings with a prayer and smudging before we would discuss the purpose of our project and how we need to be respectful in developing program designs to work with the tribal programs. And this is one of the outcomes of our many discussions in recognizing that it was important to develop a design that is more holistic in nature, that will have elements of traditional service provision to serve our consumers, our participants, our relatives, and that the focus of our efforts in working with the tribal VR programs be the consumer. So here we are looking at a model, a circular model again, which I believe was also represented by the two models shared by Paula and Elise. And we recognize that in many instances, the federal requirement in serving individuals with disability was centered on the physical and the mental. And in our many discussions, in our many meetings, in many of our on-site visits with the tribal work rehab programs, we learned that it's also essential that we look at the spiritual and emotional aspects of our consumers. We also recognize that the environment that we reside in also has an effect and impact on our well-being and how it affects our consumers as they pursue and prepare in achieving their vocational goal and eventually gainful employment. So once again, are there any comments from the attendees to what we had developed here at AIVRTTAC? Again, does this resonate with you, how you describe culturally relevant and responsive services in your current grant proposal? Jamie?
Yes, Rachel has a comment in the chat, and she would like to know, do some of the programs use their VR funds towards a consultant fee for traditional knowledge or guidance, for instance, to help develop a more inclusive model regarding how to approach the VR process, or to learn more about the terms for that tribe or tribes and how the tribe views regarding those with what we call a disability. As you had noted earlier, in most tribal language, there is not a word for disability or for unbalance or unwholeness. And so Rachel's question is getting at that. What are the tribal views on disability and how it's important to honor them, sharing that wisdom, but we can't pay for an honorarium generally. Is that correct?
Two comments come to mind. During the time that IHD was using RSA resources to provide national grant writing workshops, it was during those times when we would meet individually with the tribes, and oftentimes tribes would invite us as a follow-up to their tribal lands to have more intimate discussion to address what I believe Rachel is getting at, where they would bring in tribal administrators or tribal leadership to have these deep discussions to answer those questions. Well, many did not in the end develop a traditional model like the Navajo and the Hopi. I believe in the narrative of their grant proposal, they were succinct in describing how they define culturally appropriate services, and in many instances also shared what the tribal language or description of individuals with disabilities. We do provide intensive technical assistance, and perhaps Wayne, Jamie, or Rebecca can provide some insight as to how, in the review of the tribal grant proposals, if any of these particular questions come to the forefront, and how these are being addressed right now.
Lee, this is Rebecca. Can you more pointedly ask your question? I think I got a little lost in the description.
Okay, all right. Okay, I am wondering if in the provision of ITA, when you're given the opportunity to review the grant proposals, and maybe in some instances you provide feedback or questions for clarity in their VR design, and if the project staff do share what they mean in describing cultural relevancy, describing or defining a traditional or native language for individuals with disability. Or
Okay.
if there's also opportunity to assist existing program in designing a model similar to Navajo or Hopi.
So one of the things that we do specifically in intensive technical assistance, which is what we call ITA, which typically is working with tribal VR programs 8 months, sometimes to a year, is we look at their grant proposal, we look at the goals and objectives, and we help those projects identify the top needs of what they want to work on. Sometimes that is really understanding that VR process because they have brand new staff and they don't all understand it. They aren't all on the same page. And that's really where the AIVRTTAC staff and the content expert will begin to talk about the narrative in the grant proposal and how were traditional things defined in terms of the VR process. How's that documented in case notes, in IPE development, and really looking at how does your community celebrate culture? How do you weave culture and tradition into what you do? And how can that be reflective of your VR process? We've actually had some TVR programs begin to develop a process that is culturally appropriate for their community as part of the ITA process. But a lot of times, you know, in the ITAs, people are so focused on getting everything right for the federal government, they quickly forget that a huge piece that sets TVR apart from state VR is that cultural piece. And so what AIVRTTAC is working on is helping people come back to how are you providing those culturally sensitive and appropriate services really on a daily basis. And so, you know, it's not AIVRTTAC telling TVRs what to do, but helping them discover. You'll hear Paula and I, as well as others, say, how do we empower you as a TVR program to do what your community and your consumers need? Because only you know that. We're not experts in your community, and we're very honored to work in those communities. So how can we help you discover what works the best for holistic traditional services? And some of the tribes don't use the medicine wheel. And so helping them come up with planting seasons or something that is really resonates for their community.
You know, one thing I want to add in with that, Rebecca, is the caution that you can't pay any of your grant funds towards the development of your proposal. That's not something that's usually allowed. So I don't want, you know, when you start talking about the traditional and bringing in somebody that's traditional and has those knowledge and those experiences, you can't pay them to help you develop that for the grant proposal. Now, after you are funded and you have the proposal and has been approved, you can bring somebody in to help you establish this traditional value or traditional needs in your program for a model. So that's where you can bring in, like I see in the chat box, there's conversations about the advisory council and that type of thing. That's a great idea. You can pay the per diem, you can pay travel, you can pay all those things to that group of people coming in to help you. I just wanted to make sure that we kept in our minds that you can't pay for development of your grant proposal out of your funds from somebody outside of the project.
Hi, it's called strategic planning. When you get your grant and you're starting to formulate your policies and you're refining your policies and you get your staff together with some of your advisory council members or some of your elders who know the teachings within your community, invite them all in, develop a model. And, you know, we pay for consultants to come in and help us with strategic planning, SWOT analysis, so on and so forth. This is basically the same thing, in my opinion, and they deserve to be compensated for their knowledge and their work. So I just want to also make that clear. we also have an advisory council that helps us with our policies, and really the advisory council serves a larger role in working with our president's office to look at accessibility and other needs within our communities, but they're also advising us within our program policies. So, put it under strategic planning, and not just one strategic planning, but several throughout the year, to adapt your policies, adapt your program mission, your program vision, your program SWOT analysis, and do it in a culturally respectable way. So that's how we do it.
Thank you for sharing that, Rebecca, Wayne, and Paula. We do know that some TBR projects currently have advisory council or advisory board, serving in a advising capacity, and are used for purposes as shared by the 3 individuals who provided comments. Okay, moving on. The next slide, please. So, as a start, I developed this hopefully to give you all a better understanding as to the purpose of developing the elder circle. I also want to point out that this particular activity that we added on to our year 2 plans, that this is not a evaluation or research activity. So that's not the route that I envision for this particular elder circle. But I envision the outcome of the elder circle is through our follow-up talking circles to share with us their knowledge, their experiences, their lived experiences, serving as tribal VR professionals to describe traditional practices that is now used in contemporary provision of tribal VR services, and also help us identify how those particular practices are relevant and how they can be used, how they can be incorporated in the AIVRTTAC's education, technical assistance, capacity building activities to improve and expand tribal VR services. We have learned here at AIVRTTAC, and many of you may have also know that there is not a substantial amount of literature out there that may be considered evidence-based practices regarding tribal vocational rehabilitation services. AIVRTTAC and IHD in the past have made numerous efforts to conduct literature review of what is out there right now. And right now we don't have anything specific that we could offer to the tribal voc rehab programs to review and adapt to their current VR practices. So when we look at this circular model and not a linear model, what I envision will occur after today's first meeting is that we identify elders. And I certainly point out that those of you who are participating, self-identify yourself to be a part of the circle and to let us know. So that would be the first step, identifying the elders. To conduct talking circle. We certainly don't want to add to your workload, so we want to keep that in mind as we schedule the upcoming talking circles. I was thinking that perhaps quarterly meetings may be more feasible, more viable, so that we don't add to your workload, because we know you're very busy out there. And from the talking circles, we identify the tribal practices. And from the information that we gather from the elders, that AIVRTTAC, with your input, we develop culturally appropriate and responsive training in TA material. And to determine whether or not the inclusion of traditional practices is having an impact on provision of services resulting in successful employment outcome, AIVRTTAC will evaluate, assess our activities to determine whether or not this is having an impact on the provision of tribal VR services. So this will be a circular model that we will use. If we're successful in year 2, we will then use this model with some revision as needed for the remaining 3 years. Next slide, please. So with the next 2 slides, these are some of the items that come to mind that I believe are relevant to revitalizing and using our traditional practices in tribal VR. I'll just read a couple of the items. AIVRTTAC project directors and staff lead and advocate for, with the input of American Indians and Alaska Natives with disability in the community, identifying and providing culturally based tribal VR practices. That in our gathering, we listen to each other's, that we learn from each other's, that we recognize and include our ancestors' voices, wisdom, teaching, and guidance in tribal VR program practices. Next slide, please. I believe it's important that we start telling our stories to improve engagement with our key stakeholders, tribal leaders, community members, employers, RSA, state VR agencies. But we also recognize that it's equally important that we respect and maintain confidentiality of all of our talking circles with our elders. That it be an environment that is safe, that it's an environment that we are comfortable in sharing our stories, sharing our knowledge. I believe once we start incorporating our traditional ways of knowing, that we will improve consumer employment outcome, that it will be a reason to celebrate their achievements and recognizing them as contributing members of our respective tribal communities. Next slide, please. Before we have Ava provide us with the webinar survey questions, are there any closing comments from the audience? Anything in the chat box that we need to review at this time? I also would like to hear from all of you if you have any suggestions, ideas as to how we should move forward. Remember that AIVRTTAC is your project. So your input is highly valued as we move forward.
Yes, Lee. Charlene did put a comment in the chat. She said that she's been trying to figure out how to write a MOU for her program to work with the quote in the spirit of family training program. And so as a new director, she says it would have been helpful to have a class that shows us how to fit what we want to do by looking at our proposal, then our goals and objectives. She says, I know how to write it now to show how it fits, but what we said we would do by then looking at the proposal and then the goals and objectives. So Shelley also says, I'm a little late on the intro here. I've been on here since we started, just doing 5 other things as well. And I am the interim director for our White Earth Nation VR program. Yeah, I like your comment, Charlene. Yeah, helping new individuals or new directors, showing them how to fit, you know, what you said in your proposal into your actual program design. And we do have some of that information on the AIVRTTAC website under the new directors toolkit.
Is there anyone out there who would like to, who has some interest in being a part of the Elder Circle?
I'm an elder now, so I'll be involved.
Thank you, Paula. Mhm. Any
I was
more?
wondering what Elise was doing on the call.
And take note that while the intended audience for today's webinar was the project directors, we want to also inform you that if you have an individual in your program staff who does have a good understanding of tribal teachings, beliefs, ceremonies, who you believe could be an asset to the Elder Circle, those individuals are certainly welcome to be a part of our circle. Any more volunteers? I see this as a very exciting time to be doing this.
Darren, are you gonna talk or are you gonna?
I'm volunteering.
Okay, good.
Hey,
I might be
Darren.
too young though.
Yes, we know you're a young 21, Darren.
Yeah.
Darren, thank you for joining us. Do you have anything to share as to what transpired today? Any initial thoughts?
No, I apologize. I got on late. Just caught kind of like the tail end of it, but I like the direction you're going with this and would like to be part of it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Lee, in the chat box, Kim said she's a mini elder now
Okay,
and she wants to join as well.
all right, great.
Charlene, if you haven't gotten your support or answer, I encourage you to reach out to Rebecca or Wayne and we can help you with that.
Yes, Charlene, definitely. We welcome you to the circle. And if any of you have any questions regarding how to develop or incorporate a more culturally appropriate program design, please feel free to reach out to Wayne, to Jamie, who is responsible for the training NTA activity, Rebecca, who is taking the lead on providing ITA services. So the resources are there. So I encourage every one of you to reach out to those folks.
And I just want to say, I put a link in the chat to the toolkit on the website, just in case anyone hasn't seen it. Download a copy of it if you get a chance. There's instructions on how to download it into a PDF. There's a lot of good information in there, especially about program design.
Ava, do you want to take the honor of reading the
Actually-
results?
Actually, Amanda's hand is up, Lee.
Okay, all right. Amanda?
Hi, actually, it is part of the toolkit. I have a question on the toolkit. Is that something I could share with our economic development? We have a new program, new position, and it's under workforce development, which is where I am now, under the family services umbrella. So is that okay to share outside TVR?
Rebecca and
Okay.
I are both nodding.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
Amanda, the documents that AIVRTTAC puts on the website are public documents, so you are welcome to share those.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. If there are no closing comments, question, again, I encourage anyone who would like to have further discussion, maybe on the webinar or on the TA and training services that we provide. Also visit our website for resources that are out there for the TVR project.